A little girl burst from the dust, tears cutting through the dirt on her face, and grabbed a stranger's hand like it was her last chance at survival. "Please," she sobbed, "follow me home." The cowboy should have ridden away, he always did, but something in her desperate eyes stopped him cold. What he found when he followed her would shatter everything he thought he knew about walking away from trouble. Before we ride into this story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the map. The desert doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. Cole Tanner had learned that lesson written in dust and blood across 15 years of drifting through territories that barely qualified as civilized. The sun was falling toward the western hills like a copper coin dropping into a slot, painting the plains in shades of amber and rust, when he first heard the sound that would change everything. It wasn't much, just a rustle in the sagebrush about 50 yards off the trail. Cole's hand moved instinctively toward the revolver at his hip, his body tensing in the saddle. Out here, unexpected sounds usually meant trouble of the two-legged or four-legged variety, and neither kind was welcome when a man was alone with nothing but his horse and his thoughts. His mare, a sturdy buckskin he'd named Duchess for reasons he could no longer quite remember, flicked her ears forward and snorted. She'd heard it too. Cole pulled gently on the reins, bringing her to a halt, his eyes scanning the brush line where the sound had originated. The wind had died down to almost nothing, which meant whatever made that noise wasn't being pushed by nature. Then he saw her. A little girl exploded from the brush like a jackrabbit fleeing a coyote, her dress torn and covered in dust, her dark hair wild around her face. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, maybe 9, and she was running straight toward him with a desperation that made Cole's chest tighten in a way he didn't quite recognize. "Mister! Mister, please!" Her voice cracked on the words, high and thin and absolutely terrified. Cole dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a soft thud. Every instinct he'd honed over years of staying alive by staying uninvolved screamed at him to mount back up and ride on. Little girls in distress meant families, meant complications, meant the kind of trouble that could follow a man for miles and leave scars deeper than any knife wound. But he didn't move, couldn't move. Because the child was crying, not the frustrated tears of a kid who'd scraped her knee or lost a toy, but the kind of soul-deep sobbing that spoke of genuine terror and loss. She reached him and grabbed his hand with both of hers, her small fingers surprisingly strong as they clutched at him like he was a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Her face was streaked with tears that had carved clean lines through the dust coating her cheeks, and her eyes, deep brown and red-rimmed from crying, looked up at him with a plea that went straight through every wall he'd ever built around himself. "Please," she gasped, trying to catch her breath between sobs. "Please, you have to come. You have to follow me home. She's Mama's. I don't know what to do, and there's nobody else, and I ran all the way to the road hoping someone would come and—" Whoa, slow down there, little miss," Cole said, his voice rougher than he intended. He wasn't used to talking to children, wasn't used to talking to much of anyone these days, if he was being honest. "Take a breath. Tell me what's wrong." The girl shook her head frantically, tugging at his hand. "No time. You have to come now. Please, mister. Please. She won't wake up right, and she's so hot, and I can't." The words dissolved into another wave of tears. Cole looked down at her, then back at Duchess, then at the rapidly darkening sky. Every practical bone in his body told him this was a mistake. Get involved in a family's troubles, and you'd end up tangled in a mess that could take weeks to extract yourself from. He had maybe $3 to his name, half a canteen of water, and a vague plan to reach the town of Redstone before his luck ran completely dry. But those eyes, those desperate, terrified eyes that trusted him completely, despite having never seen him before in her life. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "All right, show me." The relief that washed over the girl's face was almost painful to witness. She immediately started pulling him toward the brush line she'd emerged from, her small hand still locked around his. Cole whistled for Duchess, who followed obediently, her reins trailing. "What's your name?" Cole asked as they pushed through the sagebrush, branches catching at his coat. "Lucy," she said, not looking back, all her focus on navigating the rough terrain. "Lucy Quinn." We live just past the creek bed. It's not far, but Mama told me never to leave her alone. But she got so bad today I had to. I had to go find help, but there was nobody. And then I heard your horse. She was talking fast, words tumbling over each other, and Cole recognized it for what it was, the babbling of a scared child trying to keep panic at bay by filling the silence. He'd seen soldiers do the same thing right before battle. The terrain got rougher as they descended into what passed for a creek bed out here, a dried-up ditch that probably saw water 3 times a year if it was lucky. Lucy navigated it with the sure-footedness of someone who'd walked this path 100 times, even as full dark began to settle over the land. Cole followed, leading Duchess carefully over the rocky ground. "How long has your mama been sick?" he asked. 3 days, Lucy said, her voice smaller now. "Maybe 4. I don't... Time feels funny when you're scared. She got a fever first, and she was still talking then, telling me she'd be fine, just needed to rest. But then yesterday she stopped making sense, and today she won't hardly wake up at all, and I'm scared, mister. I'm real scared." Cole's jaw tightened. 3 or 4 days with a high fever, getting progressively worse, and this child had been dealing with it alone. "What about your pa? Other family?" Lucy's shoulders hunched forward slightly. "Pa's been gone 2 years, got kicked by a horse and never got up. It's just been me and Mama since then. We got an aunt in Redstone, but she said we couldn't come live with her on account of her new husband don't want extra mouths to feed, so Mama said we'd make do out here, and we did. We were doing okay, but then she got sick, and—" "It's all right," Cole interrupted gently, not wanting to hear the hurt in her voice deepen. "You're doing just fine, Lucy. You got help. That's the important thing. You will help, won't you?" The question came out small and frightened. "You won't leave?" Cole didn't answer right away, because he didn't know what the truth was. He could make no promises about what he'd find when they reached her home, or what he'd be able to do about it. But he could see the cabin now, emerging from the gloom ahead. A ramshackle structure that looked like it was held together by willpower and prayer, with gaps in the walls wide enough to see through, and a roof that sagged dangerously in the middle. "I'm here now," he said, which wasn't quite an answer but was the best he could offer. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The door hung crooked on its hinges, and Lucy pushed it open with effort. The smell hit Cole first, the hot, sour smell of sickness mixed with the musty odor of a dwelling that hadn't seen proper care in days. There was no light inside except what little remained of the dying day filtering through the gaps in the walls and the open door. "I couldn't keep the fire going," Lucy said, her voice thick with shame. "I tried, but we don't got much wood left, and I was afraid to leave her long enough to gather more." "That's all right," Cole said, though his heart sank at the words. No fire meant no heat, no way to boil water, no light to see by. He moved deeper into the cabin, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The interior was sparse. A rickety table with 1 chair, some shelves that held almost nothing, and in the corner, a bed where a woman lay utterly still. Cole approached slowly, Duchess waiting patiently outside. The woman, Mara Quinn, he assumed, looked worse than he'd feared. Even in the poor light, he could see the unhealthy flush of fever on her face, the way her chest barely seemed to move with her breathing. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and when he carefully touched the back of his hand to her cheek, the heat radiating from her skin made him curse softly. "Mama?" Lucy whispered from beside him, her hand finding his again. "I brought help. He's going to make you better." Mara's eyes fluttered but didn't open. Her lips moved, forming words without sound. Cole crouched down beside the bed, his mind racing. He'd seen fever before. Hell, he'd survived a bad one himself 7 years back that should have killed him. But this woman needed more help than he could provide with the nothing he carried in his saddlebags. She needed medicine, clean water, someone who actually knew what they were doing. She needed a doctor. "Lucy," he said carefully, turning to look at the girl. "Redstone's the nearest town, right? How far?" 5 miles, maybe 6, Lucy said. "But it'll be full dark soon, and the trail's not easy to follow, and—" "I've ridden worse and darker," Cole said, straightening up. "Your mama needs a doctor, and she needs medicine. I'm going to ride into Redstone and bring back help." The fear that flashed across Lucy's face was immediate and total. "No, you can't leave. What if she gets worse? What if she stops breathing? What if you don't come back?" Cole knelt down so he was at eye level with the child. Listen to me, Lucy. I am coming back. You hear me? I'm not your pa, and I'm not your aunt, and I don't break my word. But your mama's real sick, and if we don't get her help soon... He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Lucy was scared, but she wasn't stupid. How long? Lucy whispered. I can make it there in an hour if I push hard. Finding a doctor this time of night might take longer, but I'll be back before morning, I promise you that. I'll be here alone. You've been alone for 3 days already, Cole said gently. And you've kept yourself and your mama alive this whole time. You're the bravest kid I've ever met, Lucy Quinn. A few more hours won't make much difference, and when I come back, I'll have someone who can actually help her. Lucy looked at her mother, then back at Cole. The calculation happening behind those young eyes was heartbreaking, weighing the fear of being left alone against the reality of what would happen if she wasn't. Finally, she nodded, just once. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible. But you promise? You swear you're coming back? Cole held out his hand and Lucy shook it with all the solemnity of a business deal. I swear it, he said. On my life, I swear it. He stood, already mentally mapping the fastest route to Redstone. You got any water? Lucy pointed to a bucket by the door. Little bit. I brought it up from the creek yesterday. Keep trying to get her to drink if she wakes up enough, just little sips. And if the fever spikes worse, get her clothes damp with water. That'll help cool her down some. Can you do that? Lucy nodded, standing straighter, visibly pulling courage around herself like a cloak. I can do that. Good girl. Cole moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. One more thing. You got any neighbors? Anyone else out this way? The Hendersons are about 2 miles east, but they pulled up and moved to California 3 months ago. We're pretty much alone out here now. Of course they were. Cole nodded and stepped outside where Duchess waited. The mare snorted as he approached, sensing the urgency in his movements as he checked her girth and gathered the reins. Mister? Lucy's voice came from the doorway, small against the vast darkness gathering around the cabin. Cole looked back. Thank you, she said, for not riding away. Something in Cole's chest pulled tight and sharp. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, not trusting his voice, then swung up into the saddle. Keep that door closed, he called back. Don't open it for anyone but me. Then he turned Duchess toward Redstone and gave her head. The mare surged forward, sensing the urgency, her hooves finding purchase on the rough trail even as darkness swallowed the landscape. Cole leaned forward in the saddle, his body moving with Duchess's rhythm, his mind already ahead of them, racing toward the lights of town. 5 miles, maybe 6. In full dark, over terrain that could turn an ankle or hide a prairie dog hole that would bring a horse down in an instant. But Cole had made worse rides, and he'd never had a reason that mattered as much as the one he had tonight. Behind him, miles already stretching out between them, a little girl stood in the doorway of a dying cabin and watched the darkness swallow her only hope. Then she closed the door, turned back to her unconscious mother, and started doing exactly what the cowboy had told her to do, because trusting him was the only choice she had left. The trail to Redstone cut across open prairie for the first 3 miles before entering rougher country, where the land buckled and folded on itself. Cole pushed Duchess hard, but not recklessly, knowing that a fallout here would doom them all. The moon was rising, at least, a waning crescent that provided just enough light to make out the pale ribbon of trail cutting through the darkness. His mind kept drifting back to that cabin, to the fever-hot woman who might die before he could get back, to the little girl who'd grabbed his hand and trusted a complete stranger with everything she had. Cole had spent the better part of a decade making sure he didn't get tangled up in other people's problems, keeping his connections shallow and his commitments non-existent. It was safer that way. Cleaner. You couldn't disappoint people you never made promises to. But he'd made a promise tonight, and the weight of it sat heavy in his chest. Duchess stumbled slightly on loose rock, and Cole pulled his attention back to the trail, forcing himself to focus. Getting there safe mattered more than getting there fast, if fast meant not getting there at all. The land began to rise slightly, and Cole knew they were getting close. Redstone sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst of the prairie winds, built around a reliable spring that made it one of the few settlements in this part of the territory that might actually survive another 10 years. Then he saw the lights, Just pinpricks at first, then growing stronger as Duchess carried him over the last rise. Redstone spread out below, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a central street, lamplight glowing in windows like small promises of warmth and civilization. Cole urged Duchess down the slope and into town, his arrival marked by the hollow sound of hooves on packed earth. This late in the evening, the main street was mostly quiet, though light and noise spilled from the saloon at the far end. He headed straight for it, knowing that in any frontier town, the saloon was the quickest way to get information. He tied Duchess to the rail outside and pushed through the doors into a wall of warmth, noise, and the smell of whiskey and tobacco. Conversation died briefly as heads turned to assess the stranger, then resumed as they decided he wasn't immediately interesting. Cole approached the bar, where a heavy-set man with impressive mutton chops was serving drinks. "Need information," Cole said without preamble. "Where's the doctor in this town?" The bartender looked him up and down, taking in the dust, the urgency in his voice. "Doc Mayfield, 2 streets over, White House with the green shutters. But he ain't gonna appreciate being roused this time of night." "He'll appreciate it more than the alternatives," Cole said flatly. "Woman's burning up with fever 5 miles out. Been sick 3 or 4 days. Got a little girl there alone with her." Something shifted in the bartender's expression. Recognition, maybe, or guilt. "That the Quinn woman? Out past Bitter Creek?" "That's right." The bartender exchanged glances with a couple of men at the bar. One of them, weathered and gray-bearded, shook his head slowly. "Mara Quinn. Heard she was struggling out there. Heard it was hard since John died." "Heard about it, did you?" Cole's voice was flat, but there was an edge to it sharp enough to draw blood. "And nobody thought to ride out and check on her?" The silence that fell was uncomfortable. The gray-bearded man had the decency to look ashamed. "It's a hard country, stranger. People got their own troubles." "People always got their own troubles," Cole said. "Doc Mayfield, White House, green shutters. Thanks." He was already turning away when the bartender called after him. "Say, stranger, you got money for the doc? Because Mayfield don't work for free, and if Mara Quinn had money for a doctor, she'd have sent for one already." Cole paused, his hand on the door. He thought about the $3 in his pocket, everything he had in the world, thought about the promise he'd made to a little girl in the dark, thought about the fact that he'd probably regret this come morning. "I'll figure it out," he said, and pushed back out into the night. The White House with green shutters wasn't hard to find. Cole pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame, not caring about propriety or proper hours. He kept pounding until a light appeared in an upstairs window, then the sound of footsteps on stairs. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged man in a nightshirt, his thin hair standing up at odd angles, a lamp held high. "This better be important," he said sharply. "Do you have any idea what time—" "Woman's dying 5 miles out," Cole interrupted. "High fever, been sick for days, can't hardly wake up. She's got a little girl there alone watching her. I need you to come now." Doc Mayfield's expression shifted from annoyed to professional in an instant. 5 miles which direction?" "Past Bitter Creek, out toward the old Henderson place." "Mara Quinn," the doctor said, nodding. "I heard she'd taken sick. Give me 5 minutes to dress and get my bag." Relief flooded through Cole, making his shoulders sag slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Mayfield said, already turning away. 5 miles is a long ride in the dark, and if she's been fevered that long— He didn't finish the sentence, just disappeared back into his house. Cole waited on the porch, every second feeling like an hour. He could feel Duchess's exhaustion through the bond that develops between a man and his horse when they've traveled enough miles together, but there was no help for it. They had to make one more run tonight, and this one mattered more than any ride Cole had made in years. True to his word, Mayfield emerged less than 5 minutes later, dressed properly and carrying a well-worn doctor's bag. He had a horse saddled and ready in his small stable out back, and within minutes, they were riding back out of Redstone at a pace that was as fast as they could manage in the dark. "Tell me about her condition," Mayfield said as they rode. Cole recounted everything he'd observed, the fever's intensity, the woman's lack of responsiveness, how long Lucy said she'd been sick. Mayfield listened without interrupting, his face grim in the moonlight. "Not good," he said when Cole finished. "Could be any number of things. Influenza, pneumonia, infection from something. Without seeing her, I can't say, but if she's lasted this long, there's hope." They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds the rhythm of hooves and the creak of leather. Then Mayfield spoke again. "You family?" "No," Cole said, "just passing through." "Then why get involved?" It was a fair question, and Cole didn't have a good answer, or maybe he did, but he didn't want to examine it too closely. "Kid needed help," he said finally. "Seemed like the thing to do." Mayfield made a non-committal sound. They rode on. The return journey felt longer than the ride into town, even though Cole knew the way now. He kept pushing aside thoughts of what they might find when they arrived, kept refusing to imagine a little girl trying to shake her mother awake with no response, kept forcing back the image of Lucy's face if Cole had to tell her he'd been too late. When the cabin finally appeared out of the darkness, a dim glow showing through the gaps in the walls, Cole felt something in his chest unclench slightly. Light meant Lucy was still awake, still fighting. He dismounted before Duchess had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground and carrying him to the door. He knocked firmly. "Lucy, it's Cole. I've got the doctor with me." The door opened almost instantly, and Lucy's face appeared, streaked with fresh tears but alive with hope. "You came back," she whispered. "Told you I would," Cole said, stepping aside so Mayfield could enter. The doctor moved past them efficiently, already assessing the situation as he approached the bed. He set his bag down and immediately began examining Mara, checking her pulse, lifting her eyelids, listening to her breathing. Lucy pressed herself against Cole's side, her small hand finding his. He looked down at her, at the exhaustion and fear and desperate hope all mixed together on her face, and something in him shifted in a way he couldn't quite name. "Mr. Tanner," Mayfield said, not looking up from his patient. "I'll need clean water boiled if possible, and any clean cloth you can find. This fever needs to break, and I'll need to administer medicine." "I'll get the fire going," Cole said, gently disentangling himself from Lucy and moving toward the cold hearth. There wasn't much wood, but there was enough to start a small fire if he was careful. Within minutes, he had flames licking at the kindling, and Lucy had produced their cleanest pot filled with the last of their water. As the water heated, Cole watched Mayfield work. The doctor moved with practiced efficiency, pulling bottles from his bag, mixing preparations, all while maintaining a running commentary to Lucy about how her mother was stable, how they'd gotten here in time, how everything was going to be all right. Cole hoped he was right. "Pneumonia," Mayfield announced after several minutes of examination. "Probably started as a bad cold and got worse. The fever's dangerously high, but she's young and she's strong. We got here in time." The relief that washed over Lucy's face made every hard mile of the ride worth it. She started crying again, but these were different tears, the kind that came when fear finally released its grip. "She's going to be okay," Lucy whispered. "She's going to be okay," Mayfield confirmed, "but she's going to need care for the next few days. Medicine, rest, good food when she can take it, and she's going to need to stay warm and dry." He glanced around the cabin meaningfully, taking in the gaps in the walls, the threadbare blankets, the emptiness of the shelves. Cole saw the doctor's jaw tighten. "We'll figure it out," Cole heard himself say, even though he had no idea how. "Main thing is she'll live." "Main thing is she'll live," Mayfield agreed. He turned to his bag and began preparing a dose of medicine. "Now, Miss Lucy, I'm going to need your help. Your mother needs to take this medicine, which means we need to wake her up just enough to swallow. Can you do that?" Lucy nodded, moving to her mother's side with determination written on her face. Together, she and Mayfield worked to rouse Mara enough to take the medication, Lucy talking softly to her mother, coaxing her toward consciousness with a gentleness that made Cole's throat tight. Finally, Mara's eyes fluttered open, clouded with fever but aware. Her gaze found Lucy, and something in her face softened. "Baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mama, you have to take the medicine," Lucy said. "The doctor's here. Everything's going to be all right now." Mara tried to focus, her eyes sliding past Lucy to where Mayfield waited with a spoon of medicine, then past him to where Cole stood by the fire, a stranger in her home. Confusion crossed her face. "It's okay, Mama," Lucy said quickly. "He helped me. He brought the doctor. Please, you have to drink this." It took several tries, but Mayfield finally got the medicine into Mara, along with some water. Almost immediately, her eyes closed again, sliding back toward sleep, but her breathing seemed easier, less labored. The medicine will take time to work, Mayfield said, straightening up, but the fever should start breaking by morning. She needs to keep taking it every few hours, and she needs fluids as often as you can get them into her. He pulled out several small bottles and set them on the rickety table. Continue the medicine as directed. If the fever spikes again or she gets worse, send for me immediately. But I think we've turned the corner. Thank you, Lucy said, the words coming out thick with emotion. Thank you so much. Mayfield smiled at her, a genuine expression that softened his face. You're a brave girl, Lucy Quinn. Your mother's lucky to have you. He turned to Cole. As for my fee, how much? Cole interrupted. For the house call, examination, and medicine, for $15. $15? Cole had $3. He could see Lucy's face fall, see the fear creeping back that maybe they'd gotten this far only to fail at the last step. I've got $3 on me right now, Cole said steadily. I'll work off the rest. Whatever you need. Chores, repairs, whatever. But she needed help tonight. Mayfield studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Keep your $3. You'll need it more than I do. The ride out and back in the dark was payment enough, and something tells me you're not the type to welch on a debt anyway. We'll call it square. Cole blinked, not sure he'd heard right. You don't have to do that. I know I don't, Mayfield said. He glanced at Lucy, then back at Cole. But it's been a long time since I saw someone ride that hard for people who aren't their own family. Good to know there's still folks who'll do the right thing just because it needs doing. Consider it my contribution to making sure that instinct doesn't die out completely. He gathered his bag and headed for the door. I'll check back in 2 days. If anything changes before then, you know where to find me. Then he was gone, the sound of his horse fading into the darkness, leaving Cole and Lucy alone in the cabin with the woman who was finally sleeping peacefully instead of burning with fever. Lucy looked up at Cole, her eyes wide and filled with something that looked dangerously close to worship. You saved her, she whispered. You saved my mama. Doctor did that, Cole said gruffly, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gratitude. I just rode fast. You came back, Lucy said. You promised you would, and you did, and now everything's going to be okay. She threw her arms around his waist in a fierce hug that caught him completely off guard. Cole stood frozen for a moment, his hands hovering uncertainly, before finally settling awkwardly on her shoulders in something that might generously be called a returned embrace. Yeah, well, he said, his voice rough. Someone had to. Lucy pulled back and looked up at him with those two old eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone so young. Will you stay? Just until morning, please? I don't want to be alone anymore tonight. Cole looked at the door, at the darkness beyond it, at the trail that led away from this place and back to the solitary life he'd built for himself. Every practical instinct told him to make his excuses and go. He'd done his good deed. He'd kept his promise. This wasn't his family, wasn't his problem, wasn't his responsibility. But Lucy was still looking at him with those eyes, and Mara was breathing easier in the bed, and something in Cole had shifted tonight in a way that he suspected couldn't be shifted back. Yeah, he heard himself say, I'll stay until morning. The relief on Lucy's face made the decision feel less like surrender and more like something he couldn't quite name. She nodded, suddenly looking like the exhausted child she was, and moved to curl up on a pallet near her mother's bed. Cole added another piece of wood to the fire and settled into the room's only chair, prepared for a long night of keeping watch. Outside, Duchess found some scrub grass to nibble on and rested in the cool darkness. Inside, 3 people who'd been strangers that morning breathed together in the warm glow of firelight. A little girl finally able to sleep without fear, a woman whose fever had broken, and a cowboy who'd stopped running away long enough to save them both. The night stretched out ahead, dark and vast and full of uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring. But for now, in this moment, they were alive and together and safe. And sometimes, Cole thought as his eyes drifted towards sleep, sometimes that was enough. Morning came slowly to the plains, the sun climbing through layers of purple and pink, before finally breaking free as a coin of pale gold. Cole woke stiff and sore in the chair, his neck protesting the angle he'd slept at, his body reminding him that he wasn't 20 anymore and couldn't spend nights sitting upright without consequence. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cold again, but when Cole's eyes found Maraquin's sleeping form, he could see immediately that something fundamental had changed. The unhealthy flush was gone from her cheeks, replaced by normal color. Her breathing was deep and even. The fever had broken sometime in the night, just as Doc Mayfield had predicted. Lucy was still curled on her pallet, finally getting the kind of sleep that came after days of fear and exhaustion had lifted. Cole stood carefully, not wanting to wake her, and moved to check the patient. He didn't touch Mara, but he could see she was resting peacefully, truly sleeping now, instead of that fever-induced unconsciousness that had gripped her before. He stepped outside into the cool morning air, needing to stretch his legs and clear his head. Duchess greeted him with a soft nicker, and he ran his hand down her neck, checking her over from the hard ride the night before. She seemed none the worse for wear, already nosing around for anything edible in the sparse landscape. In the morning light, the Quinn homestead looked even more desperate than it had seemed in the darkness. The cabin was barely standing, held together by determination and luck. What passed for a barn was little more than 3 walls and a prayer, and the fencing around what might once have been a vegetable garden had long since collapsed. The whole place had the look of a battle being slowly lost against the harsh reality of trying to survive in country that didn't particularly want you there. Cole walked the perimeter of the property, his practiced eye cataloging what would need to be done if anyone actually wanted to make this place livable again. The list was long and daunting. New boards for the cabin walls, repairs to the roof, firewood to be cut and stacked, water to be hauled, fencing to be mended, and that was just to get through the next few weeks. He found himself wondering what John Quinn had been thinking, bringing a wife and daughter out to a place this isolated, this vulnerable. Then again, Cole had seen enough of the frontier to know that people didn't always choose their circumstances. Sometimes you took what you could get and tried to make it work, and sometimes the land won despite your best efforts. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open and Lucy emerged, blinking in the bright morning light. Her hair was a mess and her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, but her face held something it hadn't the night before: hope. "Mama's still sleeping," she reported, coming to stand beside Cole. "But she looks better, don't she? The fever's gone." "It is," Cole confirmed. Doctor knew what he was doing. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the sad little homestead. Then Lucy spoke again, her voice smaller. "You're going to leave now, ain't you?" The question hung in the air between them. Cole had been asking himself the same thing since he woke up. The practical answer was yes. He'd done what he'd promised. Mara would live. The doctor would check on them. Cole could ride out with a clear conscience, back to his solitary wandering, back to the life where he didn't get tangled up in other people's problems. But standing there in the morning light, looking at the work that needed doing and the child who'd trusted him completely, Cole found that the practical answer stuck in his throat. "Your mama's going to need help for a few days," he said instead. "Someone to keep the fire going, fetch water, make sure she takes her medicine. You can't do all that and take care of her too." Lucy's face brightened like sunrise. "You'll stay? Really?" "For a few days," Cole emphasized, as much to remind himself as her. "Just until your mama's back on her feet and can manage." "Thank you," Lucy breathed. Then, with the rapid subject change of childhood, "Are you hungry? I could make breakfast. We got some cornmeal left, and there's a few eggs if the chickens laid any." "You got chickens?" "3 of them. They're hiding in what's left of the barn. Been taking care of themselves mostly since Mama got sick." Cole nodded. "You make breakfast. I'll see about gathering some firewood and checking on those chickens of yours." Lucy beamed and hurried back inside. Cole watched her go, then turned his attention to the practical matters of survival. There were some dead branches in the scrub not too far from the cabin, and within an hour he'd gathered enough wood to keep the fire going for a couple of days. He found the chickens where Lucy had said they'd be, scraggly, nervous birds that scattered at his approach, but had indeed left 3 eggs in a nest of straw. When he returned to the cabin with the eggs and an armload of wood, the smell of cooking cornmeal greeted him. Lucy was at the hearth, carefully tending a pan that had seen better days, and from the bed came a sound that made both of them freeze. "Lucy?" Mara's voice was weak and confused, but it was conscious, aware. "Baby, where are you?" Lucy nearly dropped the pan in her rush to her mother's side. "Mama, you're awake, really awake." Cole hung back by the door, suddenly feeling like an intruder as mother and daughter reunited. Mara was trying to sit up. Lucy was half laughing and half crying, and for a moment the cabin was full of a kind of joy that Cole hadn't witnessed in longer than he could remember. Then Mara's eyes found him standing there with his armload of firewood, and confusion crossed her face. "Who?" "Mama, that's Cole," Lucy said quickly. "Mr. Tanner. He helped me. When you got so bad I didn't know what to do, I ran to the road hoping someone would come by. And he did. And he brought the doctor. And the doctor said, 'You're going to be fine.' And—" "Slow down, baby," Mara said, but she was smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm, even as her eyes remained on Cole, trying to piece together what had happened during the days she'd lost to fever. "Mr. Tanner, thank you. Lucy says you helped her." Cole set the firewood down by the hearth, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "Just did what needed doing, ma'am. You gave your daughter quite a scare." Mara's face crumpled slightly. "I tried to tell her I'd be fine. I didn't want to worry her. How long was I—" "4 days of fever," Cole said. "Last night was the worst of it. Doc Mayfield came out, gave you medicine, said you had pneumonia but that we got to it in time." "Doc Mayfield came all the way out here?" Mara looked stunned. "But I don't have money for—" "It's taken care of," Cole said firmly, not wanting to get into the details of Mayfield's generosity or his own involvement. "Main thing is you're on the mend now. You need to keep taking the medicine and resting." Mara tried to push herself more upright and immediately went pale, her strength clearly not yet returned. Lucy was there instantly, helping her settle back against the thin pillow. "You got to rest, Mama. Mr. Tanner said he'd stay and help for a few days, just until you're better." Cole saw the conflict cross Mara's face, gratitude warring with pride, need warring with the independence she'd clearly been fighting to maintain. "Mr. Tanner, we can't ask you to—" "Not asking," Cole interrupted. "Telling. You try to do anything more than rest right now, and you're liable to make yourself sick again. Lucy can't haul water and chop wood and keep you fed all by herself. So I'll stay a few days. Not looking for thanks, not looking for payment, just seems like the thing to do." Mara studied him for a long moment, and Cole had the uncomfortable feeling of being assessed and measured in ways he couldn't quite define. Finally, she nodded slowly. "A few days, then. And I am grateful, Mr. Tanner, whether you want to hear it or not." "Cole's fine," he said gruffly. "Now, Lucy's got breakfast working. You should try to eat something if you can keep it down." The next few hours settled into a strange domestic rhythm. Lucy finished cooking the cornmeal and eggs, which they divided between the three of them. Mara managed a few bites before exhaustion claimed her again. But it was real sleep this time, healing sleep, and Lucy's relief was palpable. Cole busied himself with the endless small tasks that had been neglected during Mara's illness. He repaired the door so it hung straight on its hinges. He found the gaps in the cabin walls and stuffed them with mud and grass to keep out the wind. He hauled water from the creek, discovering in the process that the path down was treacherous with loose stones that could turn an ankle if you weren't careful. Lucy followed him around like a shadow, alternating between checking on her mother and helping Cole with whatever task he'd taken on. She was surprisingly useful for a child her age, clearly used to hard work and making herself helpful. As they worked together to sort through what remained of the winter vegetables in the root cellar, most of them rotted or sprouted, she talked. And talked, and talked. It was like a dam had burst. Lucy told him about her father, about the horse that had killed him, about how Mama had been so sad for so long, but had finally started smiling again. She told him about the chickens, and how she'd named them all, even though Mama said it was silly to name animals you might have to eat someday. She told him about her aunt in Redstone, and how it had hurt when Aunt Caroline had said there wasn't room for them, but how Mama had said it was fine. They'd manage on their own. They didn't need anybody's charity. Cole listened with half an ear while he worked, offering the occasional grunt of acknowledgement, and found himself wondering when he'd last had a conversation that lasted more than 5 minutes. His life for the past decade had been defined by solitude, punctuated by brief, transactional exchanges in towns he passed through. This constant stream of words, of connection, of being seen by another human being, it was exhausting and strangely comforting in equal measure. By midday, Mara woke again, more alert this time. Cole helped her sit up and take her medicine, then Lucy brought her water and more of the cornmeal. Mother and daughter talked quietly while Cole made himself scarce outside, giving them privacy. He was examining the barn, if you could even call it that, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Mara standing in the cabin doorway, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the day, leaning heavily against the frame. "You shouldn't be up," Cole called, already moving toward her. "I've been lying down for 4 days," Mara said, though her voice was still weak. "I needed to to assess." She trailed off, looking at the property with eyes that saw all too clearly how much had fallen apart. Cole watched her face as she took it in. The collapsed fencing, the deteriorating buildings, the general air of entropy that had taken hold. He saw the moment her shoulders sagged, saw the weight of it all settle over her. "It's worse than I thought," she said quietly. Cole reached her side and offered his arm, which she took without comment, allowing him to support her as she stood in the doorway. "It's manageable," he said, which was partly true. "Some work, but manageable." "For a strong man with tools and time, maybe," Mara said. She looked up at him, and he was struck by how much strength remained in her eyes, despite the physical weakness. "But I'm not a strong man, Mr. Tanner. I'm a widow with a child and no money, and a body that just proved it can't be counted on. This place is dying. I've known it for months. I just didn't want to admit it." "Mama, don't," Lucy said from behind them, her voice tight with fear. "We can fix it. We can make it work." Mara reached back to touch her daughter's face. "Oh, baby, you've been so brave. But bravery doesn't hold up walls or keep the winter cold out." Cole looked between them, at the desperation poorly hidden on Mara's face, at the fear on Lucy's. He thought about riding away tomorrow or the next day, about leaving them to face the slow collapse of their lives alone. Thought about the promise in Lucy's eyes when she'd asked if he'd stay. Thought about the weight of responsibility he'd spent years avoiding. 5 days, he heard himself say. Both Quinns looked at him. "Give me 5 days," Cole continued, the plan forming even as he spoke. "I'll shore up what I can, patch the walls properly, fix the roof, get you enough firewood stacked to last a few weeks. Won't make the place perfect, but it'll buy you time to figure out what comes next. And when I ride into Redstone for supplies, I'll ask around, see if there's anyone looking for workers, see what options might be available." "Mr. Tanner, I can't," Mara started. "You can," Cole interrupted. "Consider it payment for the hospitality and the hot meals. 5 days, and then I'll move on. But at least you'll be in a position to make choices instead of just surviving day to day." He could see Mara wanting to argue, wanting to maintain her pride and independence. But he could also see the exhaustion in her face, the knowledge that she couldn't do this alone, that she'd been drowning slowly, and here was someone offering to pull her up long enough to catch her breath. 5 days, she finally agreed. "But we keep count of everything you do, and someday, when we're back on our feet, we'll find a way to repay you." "Deal," Cole said, even though he had no intention of ever collecting. "Now get back to bed before you fall over. Your daughter's anxious enough without watching you collapse." Mara allowed Lucy to guide her back inside, and Cole turned back to survey the property with new eyes. 5 days. He'd given himself 5 days to make a difference, to give this little family a fighting chance. It was more commitment than he'd made to anything or anyone in years. He found himself wondering what the hell he was thinking. The afternoon passed in hard physical labor. Cole started with the roof, which was the most urgent issue. Winter was still months away, but the spring rains would come sooner, and those gaps in the shingles would turn the cabin into a miserable, soaking mess if they weren't addressed. He found some old boards behind the barn and spent hours cutting and fitting them, his hands remembering skills he'd learned years ago and hadn't used in longer than he cared to remember. Lucy brought him water periodically and sat watching him work, asking questions about everything. How did he know how to fix things? Where had he learned? Had he ever built a whole house? Did he have a house somewhere? That last question made Cole pause, hammer raised. Did he have a house somewhere? Once, maybe. Long ago. But that life belonged to a different man, Someone he'd left behind so thoroughly that thinking about it felt like remembering a story about someone else. "Nope," he said, driving another nail home. "Just me and Duchess, going where the road takes us." "Don't you get lonely?" The question, asked with such innocent directness, hit harder than Cole expected. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely's better than some other things." Lucy seemed to sense she'd touched something tender and changed the subject to the chickens, telling him elaborate stories about their personalities and adventures. Cole let her chatter wash over him while he worked, finding a strange peace in the simple act of fixing something, of making something better with his own two hands. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Cole climbed down from the roof and stood back to assess his work. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid. The cabin would stay dry now. Inside, Mara was awake again and sitting up in bed, looking substantially better than she had that morning. Lucy was at the hearth, working on dinner with the intense concentration of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. The domestic scene struck Cole with unexpected force. This was what home looked like, what family looked like, all the things he'd been running from for so long. "Mr. Tanner," Mara said as he entered, "Lucy tells me you've been working on the roof all afternoon." "Cole," he corrected automatically, "and yeah, it needed doing. I heard hammering. I wanted to come see, but Lucy wouldn't let me." "Lucy was right," Cole said. "You need to rest, build your strength back." Mara smiled slightly. "You're very determined about that." "Someone has to be. You've got a stubborn streak, I'm guessing." "Pa used to say Mama was stubborn as a mule with a headache," Lucy chimed in from the hearth, and Mara laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone. "Your pa wasn't wrong," she admitted, then, more seriously to Cole, "I want you to know, Mr. Tanner, Cole, what you're doing for us, it means more than I can properly express. We were in a bad way before you came along." "You'd have figured it out," Cole said, uncomfortable with the depth of emotion in her voice. "Maybe," Mara said. "Or maybe Lucy would have been burying me out back of the cabin and trying to survive alone until winter killed her too. You don't have to pretend this wasn't desperate, Cole. We both know it was." The blunt honesty left no room for polite deflection. Cole met her eyes and nodded. "It was desperate, but it's not anymore. You're going to live, and in 5 days this place will be in better shape than it's been in months. And then you'll leave." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Cole nodded again. "Mama, can't we ask him to stay longer?" Lucy's voice was plaintive. "There's so much work and—" "Lucy," Mara said gently but firmly, "Mr. Tanner has his own life, his own road to travel. We can't ask him to set that aside for us. 5 days is already more generous than we had any right to expect." Lucy's face fell, but she nodded, returning her attention to the dinner she was preparing. Cole felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name, but that felt dangerously close to regret. Dinner that night was simple but filling, beans and cornbread with the last of the eggs scrambled in. They ate together at the rickety table, Mara managing to sit up for the meal, though Cole could see the effort it cost her. Lucy kept up her steady stream of chatter, filling the silence with stories and observations, and Cole found himself almost smiling at some of her more elaborate tales. After dinner, while Mara rested and Lucy cleaned up, Cole went outside to check on Duchess and take a walk around the property. The night was clear and cool, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. He found himself thinking about the next 5 days, about the work he'd promised to do, about the moment when he'd ride away and leave this family to their fate. It should have felt like a plan, like something with a clear endpoint. Instead, it felt like a deadline, like time running out on something he couldn't quite define. He was still standing there, staring at the stars and trying to untangle his thoughts, when he heard the cabin door open behind him. Lucy emerged, wrapped in a shawl that had probably belonged to her father. "Mama's sleeping again," she reported, coming to stand beside him. "Medicine makes her tired." "That's good," Cole said. "Sleep's how the body heals." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Lucy spoke, her voice smaller than usual. "Cole? Are you really going to leave after 5 days?" Cole looked down at her upturned face, at the worry poorly hidden there. "That's the plan." "But why? Don't you like it here? Don't you like us?" The questions twisted something in Cole's gut. It's not about that, Lucy. It's about, I'm not the staying kind. Never have been. I drift. I move on. That's just who I am. People can change, Lucy said with the absolute certainty of childhood. You could decide to stay. You could help Mama fix up the place proper. We could be like a family. The longing in her voice was almost painful to hear. Cole crouched down so he was at her eye level, the same way he had that first night when she'd begged him to follow her home. Lucy, listen to me. Your mama's one of the strongest people I've ever met. She's going to figure out how to make this work, or she's going to figure out something better. And you're brave and smart and capable. You two don't need me. But what if we want you? Lucy whispered. Cole had no answer for that. He pulled Lucy into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck, and stared over her shoulder at the vast darkness of the plains beyond the cabin. 5 days, he said quietly. Let's make them count. Lucy nodded against his shoulder, then pulled back and wiped her eyes. I'd better get back inside. Mama might need something. She hurried back to the cabin, leaving Cole alone with the stars and the weight of promises made and roads that led in opposite directions. He stayed outside a while longer, smoking a cigarette he'd rolled from the last of his tobacco, thinking about how easily a man's plans could get complicated by a little girl's tears and a woman's fever. Thinking about how 5 days suddenly didn't feel like very much time at all. Finally, when the cold drove him inside, he settled back into the chair by the fire, prepared for another night of keeping watch. Mara slept peacefully in the bed, Lucy curled up on her pallet nearby. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Cole closed his eyes and tried not to think about how good it felt to be needed, or how much harder it was going to be to leave than he'd expected. 5 days, he reminded himself. Just 5 days. But the number felt less like a promise and more like a warning, time slipping away before he had to make a choice he wasn't ready to make. The cabin settled into silence around him, the three of them breathing together in the darkness, bound by circumstance and chance and the fragile threads of connection that form when people allow themselves to care. Outside, Duchess stood patient guard beneath the stars. The wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the night, lonely and searching for something it couldn't name. Cole understood the feeling completely. The second morning brought a crisis that Cole hadn't anticipated. He woke to the sound of Lucy's frantic voice calling his name, and he was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun that wasn't there. He'd removed the gun belt before sleeping, trying not to alarm the child. Cole, come quick! He crossed the small cabin in 3 strides to find Lucy standing over her mother, who was sitting up in bed with her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with distress. For a terrible moment, Cole thought the fever had returned, that all of Mayfield's work had been for nothing. Then he saw the way Mara was breathing, short, shallow gasps that spoke of pain rather than illness. What happened? Cole demanded, his voice still rough with sleep. I don't know, Lucy said, tears already forming. She just woke up and tried to stand, and then she cried out and sat back down, and now she won't tell me what's wrong. Mara lowered her hand from her mouth, and Cole could see she was fighting hard to keep her composure. It's nothing, she said, but her voice was strained. I forgot how weak I still am. My legs gave out. That's not nothing, Cole said, moving closer. Did you hurt yourself when you fell? I didn't fall, Mara insisted. I caught myself on the bed frame. I'm fine. But the way she was holding her left wrist told a different story. Cole crouched down beside the bed, his eyes on the injured arm. Let me see. It's just a bruise. Let me see, Cole repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Mara extended her arm. Even in the dim morning light, Cole could see the swelling beginning at her wrist, the way she winced when he gently touched the area. He'd seen enough injuries to know this was more than a simple bruise. Could be sprained, could be cracked, he said. Either way, we need to wrap it and keep it still. You got any cloth we can use for bandages? There's an old sheet in the trunk, Lucy said immediately, already moving to retrieve it. The one with the holes that Mama said wasn't good for anything anymore. While Lucy searched, Cole helped Mara settle back against the pillow, noting how pale she'd gone. You pushed too hard, he said quietly. Your body just fought off pneumonia. You can't expect it to carry you around like nothing happened. I needed to use the privy, Mara said, and there was frustration and embarrassment in equal measure in her voice. I can't just lie here helpless while my daughter empties chamber pots and a stranger tends to me like I'm an invalid. You are an invalid, Cole said bluntly, at least for a few more days. There's no shame in that. You almost died, Mrs. Quinn. Your body needs time to recover. It's Mara, she said, surprising him. If you're going to be wrapping my wrist and telling me what I can and can't do, you might as well use my given name. Cole nodded, accepting this small concession. Lucy returned with the sheet, and between the two of them, they managed to tear it into strips and fashion a serviceable wrap for Mara's wrist. Cole worked carefully, trying to ignore how soft her skin was under his rough hands, trying not to think about how long it had been since he'd touched another person with gentleness instead of violence or necessity. There, he said when he'd finished. Keep it wrapped, and don't use that hand for anything. If the swelling doesn't go down in a day or two, we'll need to have Doc Mayfield look at it. We can't afford another doctor visit, Mara said immediately. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Cole said. For now, you need to accept that you're stuck in that bed for at least another couple days. No arguments. He could see Mara wanting to protest, but the pain in her wrist and the exhaustion still evident in her face made the argument for him. She nodded, settling back with a sigh that spoke of defeat and relief in equal measure. I'm not good at being helpless, she admitted quietly. Nobody is, Cole said, but sometimes we don't get a choice. The injury changed the dynamic of the day. Mara couldn't feed herself properly with only one good hand, which meant Lucy or Cole had to help her. She couldn't do any of the small tasks she'd been planning to take on as her strength returned. She was trapped in that bed more completely than the fever had trapped her, and Cole could see the frustration building in her with every hour that passed. Lucy, for her part, handled it all with a capability that continued to amaze Cole. She brought her mother water and food, helped her with the necessities of being bedridden, and did it all with a matter-of-fact kindness that spoke of experience beyond her years. This wasn't the first time she'd been her mother's caretaker, Cole realized. She'd been doing this, in one form or another, since her father died 2 years ago. With Mara confined to bed, Cole threw himself into the work he'd promised to do. He spent the morning reinforcing the walls, using mud and stones to fill the larger gaps, and create something approaching insulation. It was dirty, exhausting work, but it was also satisfying in a way he'd almost forgotten. There was something deeply right about building instead of drifting, about creating something solid instead of just passing through. By midday, he'd worked up enough of a sweat that he needed to wash. The creek was the only option, and he took Duchess down with him, letting the mare drink while he stripped off his shirt and scrubbed away the layers of mud and dust. The water was cold enough to make him gasp, but it felt good, cleansing in a way that went deeper than just physical dirt. He was drying off with his shirt when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Lucy picking her way down the treacherous path, carrying what looked like a plate wrapped in cloth. "Brought you some lunch," she called. "Mama said you'd been working too hard and needed to eat." Cole pulled his shirt back on, still damp, and accepted the plate. It was more of the cornbread from breakfast, along with some dried meat that had seen better days but was still edible. "Thank your mama for me," he said. Lucy nodded, but she didn't leave. Instead, she sat down on a flat rock near the creek bank, watching the water flow past with an expression too serious for a child's face. "Something on your mind?" Cole asked, settling down to eat. "Are you married?" Lucy asked abruptly. Cole nearly choked on the cornbread. "What?" "No, why would you ask that?" "Just wondering," Lucy said, kicking at a pebble. "You know how to take care of people real good. Thought maybe you had a family somewhere." "No family," Cole said firmly. "Just me." "Did you ever?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring at the creek without really seeing it. "Long time ago," he said finally. "Different life. Different man." "What happened?" "They died." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, as if he was talking about someone else's tragedy. "Fever took them both, my wife and my daughter. She wasn't much older than you." He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't talked about it in years, but something about this place, about Lucy's direct gaze and the way the past few days had worn down his defenses, pulled the words out of him. Lucy was quiet, processing this information with the seriousness it deserved. Is that why you don't stay nowhere? She asked finally. Because it hurts too much? The insight took Cole's breath away. This child, barely 8 years old, had seen straight through to the core of him with a clarity that was almost painful. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. I guess that's part of it. Mama says running from hurt don't make it go away, Lucy said. She says you got to walk through the hurt to get to the other side of it. Your mama sounds like a wise woman. She is, Lucy said with absolute conviction. Then, with the brutal honesty of childhood. But I think she's scared too. Scared of being alone, of not being able to take care of me. That's why she works so hard, even when she shouldn't. She's afraid if she stops, everything will fall apart. Cole looked at this remarkable child, at the wisdom and strength she carried in her small frame, and felt something in his chest crack open. You take good care of her, he said quietly. Better than most grown folks could. I try, Lucy said, but I'm glad you're here. It's nice not being alone for a while, even if it's just 5 days. The reminder of the time limit stung more than Cole expected. He'd been so focused on the work, on the immediate needs of keeping this family afloat, that he'd almost managed to forget he'd set an endpoint to this arrangement. Now, with Lucy's words, the clock started ticking again in his mind. 3 more days. He had 3 more days to shore up this place enough that they could survive his leaving. That afternoon, Cole rode into Redstone with a short list of supplies they desperately needed and the knowledge that his $3 wouldn't stretch nearly far enough. The town looked different in daylight, less threatening but also less forgiving. The main street was busy with people going about their daily business, and Cole felt the weight of curious stares as he tied Duchess up outside the general store. Inside, the proprietor was a thin man with spectacles and suspicious eyes. Cole presented his list, nails, a bit of rope, some basic foodstuffs, and watched the man calculate the cost with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much his customers could or couldn't afford. That'll be $8, the man said finally. Cole had known it would be more than he had, but hearing the number still hit hard. I've got 3, he said. Can you work with me on the rest? I'm doing repairs out at the Quinn place. They're good for it once things improve. The proprietor's expression didn't change. The Quinn place. That's the widow and her girl, right? Heard she was sick. Was, Cole confirmed. She's on the mend now, but they need help. And you're helping out of the goodness of your heart? There was skepticism in the man's voice. Something like that, Cole said evenly. Look, I need these supplies. I can work off the debt. I'm handy with repairs, can do whatever you need. But those folks need help now, not when I've earned enough to pay full price. The proprietor studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. Can't do it. I extend credit to every sob story that comes through. I'll be out of business in a month. You want the supplies? You pay up front. Cole felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced it down. Getting into an argument wouldn't help anyone. Fine, he said. Give me what $3 will buy. The reduced pile of supplies was pathetic. Barely enough nails to finish the repairs he'd started, a small sack of flour, and nothing else. Cole took them without comment and turned to leave, already trying to figure out how to make it work with what he had. He was loading the meager supplies onto Duchess when a voice spoke behind him. That's the man who came for Doc Mayfield. Cole turned to find 3 people standing on the boardwalk, watching him. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the plain but serviceable clothes of working folks. The woman was the one who'd spoken, pointing him out to her companions. You're the one staying out at the Quinn place? One of the men asked. He was older, gray-bearded, and something in his face suggested he was carrying guilt about something. That's right, Cole said cautiously. The 3 of them exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then the woman spoke again. Name's Martha Henderson. These are my brothers, Frank and Robert. We used to have a place out near the Quinns before we moved on. Cole recognized the name from what Lucy had told him. You're the neighbors they had, the ones who moved to California. We're going to California, Martha corrected. Made it as far as Denver and decided it wasn't for us. Been back about a week, staying with family in town while we figure out what's next. She paused, looking uncomfortable. We heard Mara took sick. Heard it was bad. And we heard you rode through the night to fetch the doctor, even though you didn't know her from Adam. Cole shrugged. Somebody needed to. That's just it, Frank said, stepping forward. Somebody needed to, and none of us did. We knew John Quinn died, knew Mara and little Lucy were out there alone, and we didn't do a damn thing to help because we were too wrapped up in our own troubles. We'd like to make that right, Robert added, if you'll let us. Cole looked at them, trying to understand what they were offering. What did you have in mind? What they had in mind turned out to be more generous than Cole had dared hope. Within an hour, word had spread through Redstone's small community that someone was finally helping the Quinn widow, and suddenly people were emerging from their own struggles with contributions. The bartender who'd directed Cole to the doctor sent over a bottle of whiskey and some salt pork. A farmer brought a sack of potatoes and promised to check on the family regularly. The Henderson siblings loaded up a wagon with supplies from their own stores: flour, sugar, coffee, even some preserved vegetables and a smoked ham. This is too much, Cole protested as they loaded it all. I can't accept charity on behalf of someone else. It's not charity, Martha said firmly. It's neighbors helping neighbors, the way we should have been doing all along. Mara Quinn's got pride, I know that. But pride don't keep you warm or fed. She can consider it a loan if it makes her feel better, but either way, we're not taking it back. By the time Cole headed back to the cabin, Duchess was walking alongside the Hendersons' wagon, both loaded with more supplies than the Quinn place had probably seen in months. Frank had insisted on coming along to help unload, and Martha had sent her youngest with a basket of fresh-baked bread and a warning that they'd be checking in regularly from now on. The sun was setting as they approached the cabin, painting the sky in those same shades of amber and rose that Cole was beginning to associate with this place. Lucy must have heard them coming because she burst out of the cabin at a run, her face lighting up when she saw the wagon. "Cole, you brought supplies! So many supplies!" "Not just me," Cole said, dismounting. "Town decided it was past time they helped out. Frank Henderson's here to help unload." Mara appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, her injured wrist held carefully against her chest. She looked shocked, then overwhelmed, then something that might have been the beginning of tears as she took in the wagon full of goods. "Martha Henderson sends her apologies," Frank said, tipping his hat. "We all should have been better neighbors. We aim to fix that starting now." I can't." Mara seemed to be struggling to find words. "This is too much." "It's what should have been done months ago," Frank said firmly. "Now where do you want all this?" They spent the next hour unloading supplies, stacking them carefully in the cabin and the small root cellar. Lucy was beside herself with excitement, cataloging every item with the wonder of a child who'd grown used to scarcity. Mara watched from the bed where Cole had insisted she return, her face a complicated mix of gratitude, relief, and something that looked like shame. When Frank finally left with promises to return soon with his siblings to help with more substantial repairs, and Lucy was occupied with organizing their windfall of supplies, Cole found himself alone with Mara for the first time since morning. "You did this," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Town did it," Cole corrected, settling into the chair by her bed. "I just asked for help." "But you asked," Mara pressed. "Even though you barely know us, even though you're leaving in a few days, you went into town and told our story and got people to care." Cole shifted uncomfortably. "Lucy told me your neighbors moved away. Figured they might feel bad about that, might want to help if someone pointed out the need." Mara was quiet for a moment, studying him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than Cole wanted to reveal. "Who were they?" she asked finally. "Who were who?" "The family you lost. The ones who made you start running." Cole's breath caught. He glanced toward where Lucy was still happily sorting through supplies, far enough away not to hear. "Lucy told you." "She tells me everything," Mara said gently. "She's worried about you, you know. Thinks you're sad under all that stoic cowboy exterior." "I'm fine." "Are you?" Mara's voice was soft but insistent. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a man who's been hurting for a long time and doesn't know how to stop." Cole stood abruptly, needing to move, to escape the compassion in her voice. "My past is my business, Mrs. Quinn." "Mara," she corrected. "And you're right, it is your business. But Cole, you saved my life. You saved my daughter from watching me die. You've worked yourself near exhausted, fixing our home, and somehow convinced an entire town to remember what community means. You've given us so much. Maybe, maybe it's time someone gave something back to you. I don't need anything, Cole said, but the words came out less certain than he intended. Everyone needs something, Mara said. Even drifters who think they're better off alone, maybe especially them. Before Cole could respond, Lucy called out that dinner was ready, breaking the tension of the moment. They ate together that night with more food than they'd had since Cole arrived, the cabin warm from the fire and full of something that felt dangerously close to contentment. After dinner, while Mara slept and Lucy dozed on her pallet, Cole sat by the fire and thought about families lost and found, about the weight of the past and the possibility of something different. Outside, the night wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it the promise and threat of change. He had 2 days left on his self-imposed deadline, 2 days to finish the work he'd started, 2 days before he had to choose between the road he knew and the life he'd glimpsed in a broken-down cabin with a woman and child who'd somehow seen past his defenses. 2 days that suddenly felt like nowhere near enough time to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do next. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In her bed, Mara stirred and murmured something in her sleep. On her pallet, Lucy dreamed of chickens and full pantries and cowboys who kept their promises. And Cole sat watch through another night, guardian of something he still wasn't ready to name but couldn't quite let go of either. The third morning dawned with an unexpected sound. Voices outside the cabin, the creak of wagon wheels, the purposeful noise of people arriving with intention. Cole was already awake, had been for an hour, watching the first light creep through the gaps he hadn't yet sealed. When he heard the commotion, his first instinct was wariness, the old reflexes of a man used to trouble finding him in unexpected places. But when he stepped outside, what he found wasn't trouble. It was the Henderson siblings, all 3 of them, plus 2 other men Cole recognized from the saloon, and Martha's husband driving a wagon loaded with lumber and tools. "Mornin'," Frank called out, tipping his hat. "Hope we didn't wake you. Figured we'd get an early start on the real work." Cole stared at them, at the supplies they'd brought, at the expectant faces waiting for direction. "You came to help," he said, still processing. "Course we did," Martha said, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility. "You think we were going to let you try to shore up this whole place by yourself in 2 days? We're not that heartless, even if we were shamefully slow to remember it." Behind Cole, the cabin door creaked open and Lucy emerged, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw the gathering, her face transformed into pure joy. "Mama! Mama! Come look! Everyone's here!" Mara appeared moments later, still moving carefully but looking stronger than she had in days. She'd managed to dress herself this morning, Cole noticed, even with the injured wrist, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. When she saw the crowd in her yard, her hand went to her mouth and her eyes filled with tears. "You all came," she said, her voice breaking. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, we did," Martha said firmly, moving to embrace her old neighbor. "We should have come months ago. Better late than never, and we're here now, so let us help, Mara, please." What followed was one of the most remarkable days Cole had experienced in longer than he could remember. The men set to work on the major structural issues, replacing rotted boards in the cabin walls, reinforcing the barn so it might actually shelter animals through winter, mending the fencing around what used to be a vegetable garden. Martha and another woman she'd brought along worked with Lucy to organize the cabin's interior, cleaning and arranging things with an efficiency that came from years of frontier living. Cole found himself directing the work almost without meaning to, his experience and eye for construction making him the natural leader of the effort. Frank deferred to him without question, and the other men followed suit, treating Cole like he belonged there, like he was part of the community they were rebuilding around the Quinn homestead. "You got a good eye for this," Robert commented as they worked together to set a new support beam for the barn. "You done construction before?" "Some," Cole said, not elaborating. "Picked up skills here and there." "Well, you picked up the right ones. This place would have collapsed entirely by winter if someone hadn't stepped in. Mara's strong as they come, but she can't do this kind of work alone." Cole hammered in another nail, the rhythm of the work almost meditative. "She shouldn't have had to try. Where was everyone when John Quinn died? When she was out here struggling?" The question came out harsher than Cole intended, But Robert didn't flinch from it. "You're right to ask," he said quietly. "We all got our excuses, our own troubles, our own worries. But the truth is, we just didn't think about it enough. Didn't make it our problem. That's the ugly side of frontier life sometimes. Everyone's so focused on their own survival, they forget we survive better together." "And now?" "Now we do better," Robert said simply. "Now we remember what community is supposed to mean." By midday, the transformation was remarkable. The cabin had solid walls with no gaps for wind to whistle through. The barn had a roof that would actually keep rain out. The fencing was mended and sturdy. Martha and her helper had scrubbed the interior of the cabin until it practically gleamed, had organized the supplies into something approaching a proper pantry, had even found some wildflowers to put in a jar on the table. Lucy was everywhere at once, helping where she could, chattering with excitement, her face brighter than Cole had yet seen it. And Mara, despite being ordered to rest, couldn't help but be drawn into the activity, offering suggestions and thanks in equal measure, her own spirits clearly lifted by the presence of community she'd been without for so long. They all took a break for lunch, gathering in the yard to share food that Martha had brought: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and even some early strawberries that must have cost a fortune this time of year. People sat on whatever was available, overturned buckets, the wagon tailgate, the ground itself, and ate together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "To neighbors," Frank said, raising a cup of water and toast. "Better late than never." "To neighbors," everyone echoed, and the simple words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Cole found himself sitting slightly apart from the main group, not quite sure where he fit in this gathering. He was helping, sure, but he wasn't really one of them. He was still the drifter, still the man who'd be moving on. Except sitting there, watching Lucy laugh at something Martha said, seeing Mara smile with genuine happiness for the first time since he'd met her, Cole felt the familiar urge to move on, warring with something else, something he didn't quite want to examine. "You look troubled," Mara said, settling down beside him with her plate balanced on her lap, her injured wrist carefully cradled, on a day when everything's finally going right. "Just thinking," Cole said. "About leaving?" He glanced at her, surprised at her directness. "How did you get this look," Mara said, "like you're already somewhere else in your head. Lucy's noticed it too. She's been extra clingy today because she knows your 5 days are almost up." Cole looked across the yard to where Lucy was indeed watching him, even while pretending to be absorbed in conversation with Martha. The child caught his eye and smiled, but there was worry underneath it. "I made a promise," Cole said quietly. 5 days to help get you back on your feet. It's been 4. And tomorrow you ride out." That was the deal. Mara was quiet for a moment, eating her lunch with careful, one-handed precision. Then she spoke, her voice low enough that only Cole could hear. "Can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer?" Cole tensed but nodded. "What are you running from?" Mara asked. "Not your past. I know about that now. About your loss. I mean, what are you running from right now, right here? Because from where I'm sitting, you've found something in these few days. I see it in the way you work, the way you are with Lucy, the way you've stepped into this place like you belong here. So why are you so determined to leave?" The question hit harder than any physical blow could have. Cole set down his plate, suddenly not hungry anymore. "Because I don't belong here," he said. "Because I'm not the staying kind. Because every time I let myself get attached to something, it gets taken away, and I can't—" He stopped, surprised by how much had almost spilled out. "You can't survive losing someone again," Mara finished for him. "So you don't let yourself care in the first place." Something like that. That's not living, Cole. That's just existing. Moving from place to place like a ghost, never letting yourself be real to anyone. "It's safer," Cole said. And there was something raw in his voice that he hadn't intended to let show. "Maybe," Mara agreed. "But it's also lonely. And it's also not what Lucy needs to see. She's been watching you these past few days like you hung the moon. She needs to learn that good people stay, that promises don't have expiration dates, that community means something. If you leave tomorrow, what you're teaching her is that even the people who seem solid will eventually abandon you." "That's not fair," Cole said, anger flaring. "I never promised to stay forever. I never promised to be anything more than temporary help." You're right, Mara said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just sadness. You didn't promise anything beyond 5 days. But Cole, sometimes the promises we make without words matter more than the ones we say out loud. You rode through the night for us. You worked yourself exhausted fixing our home. You made my daughter feel safe for the first time since her father died. Those are promises too, whether you meant them to be or not. Cole stood abruptly, needing to move, to escape the weight of her words. I should get back to work, he said roughly. Still got plenty to do before dark. He walked away before Mara could respond, but he felt her eyes on his back, felt the truth of what she'd said sitting heavy in his chest like a stone. The afternoon work was harder than the morning, not because of the physical labor, but because Cole couldn't stop thinking about Mara's words, couldn't stop seeing Lucy's worried glances, couldn't stop feeling like he was standing at a crossroads without a clear sign pointing which way to go. As the sun began its descent, Doc Mayfield arrived to check on his patient. He examined Mara's wrist first, pronouncing it sprained but healing well, then checked on her recovery from the pneumonia with the thorough attention of a man who took his profession seriously. You're doing remarkably well, he told Mara when he'd finished. Another week of rest and light activity, and you should be back to full strength. The wrist will take a bit longer, but it's nothing permanent. You were very lucky. I had help, Mara said, glancing toward where Cole was working on the last section of fencing. Mayfield followed her gaze and nodded. So I see. Heard in town about the work party today. Good to see people remembering what community means, and good to see our mysterious cowboy sticking around to see the job through. He's leaving tomorrow, Lucy said from her corner, her voice small and miserable. His 5 days are up. Mayfield looked between the child, her mother, and the man working in the yard, and something understanding crossed his face. Is that so? He said neutrally. Well, everyone's got to make their own choices, I suppose. Though it seems to me that good help is hard to find, and a man with his skills could do worse than settling somewhere people appreciate him. Tell him that, Lucy said, and there was a note of desperation in her voice that made Cole's hand still on the fence post he was setting. Lucy, that's enough, Mara said gently but firmly. Dr. Mayfield, thank you for coming all the way out here again. My pleasure, Mayfield said, packing up his bag. I'll check on you again in a week, but I don't anticipate any complications. You're a strong woman, Mrs. Quinn. You'll pull through this just fine. After Mayfield left, as the last of the work party began packing up their tools and saying their goodbyes, Cole found himself standing in the yard watching the sun paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. Martha approached him, her weathered face kind but serious. You've done a good thing here, she said. More than good. You've given Mara and Lucy a real chance. Just kept a promise, Cole said. Did more than that, Martha insisted. You reminded all of us what we should have been doing all along. That matters, Cole. Don't discount it. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. My brothers and I, we're planning to resettle our old place. It's about 2 miles from here. Good land, just needs work to bring it back. We could use help, someone who knows construction, who can work hard. Pay wouldn't be much at first, but it would be steady, and you'd have a place to stay, meals, community, if you were interested in staying in the area. Cole felt something in his chest tighten. I appreciate the offer, but think about it, Martha interrupted. Don't answer now. Just think about it. Sometimes the thing we're running from isn't behind us at all. Sometimes it's the thing we're running toward that scares us most. She patted his arm and moved away to join her brothers in the wagon. Within minutes, the work party had departed, leaving behind a transformed homestead and a family standing in the yard waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared over the rise, Lucy turned to Cole with tears already streaming down her face. Please don't go, she said, all her carefully maintained composure crumbling. Please, Cole, we need you. I need you. Can't you stay? Can't you just stay? Cole crouched down and pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with sobs against his chest. Over her head, he met Mara's eyes and saw the same plea there, unspoken but no less powerful. Lucy, sweetheart, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. I can't just... It's not that simple. I don't have anything to offer you. I'm a drifter with no money, no property, no prospects. What kind of life is that for you and your mama? A life with you in it, Lucy sobbed. That's all I want. I don't care about money or property or any of that. I just want you to not leave. Lucy, Mara said gently, coming to take her daughter's shoulders. Come on, baby. Let's go inside. It's getting cold. Lucy pulled back from Cole, wiping her face with her sleeve. I hate this, she said with sudden vehemence. I hate that good things always go away. First Papa, then the neighbors, now you. Everybody leaves. She turned and ran into the cabin, leaving Cole and Mara standing in the gathering darkness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mara sighed, a sound full of exhaustion and resignation. She'll be all right, she said quietly. She's stronger than she knows. We both are. We survived before you came, and we'll survive after you go. Don't let guilt keep you somewhere you don't want to be, Cole. That's not fair to anyone. And if I do want to be here. The words were out before Cole could stop them, surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Mara. What if I'm not running from you and Lucy? What if I'm running from the idea that I could actually have this again, have a reason to stay somewhere, and then lose it all over again? Mara's expression softened. Then you're running from the wrong thing, she said. Because the pain of loss doesn't go away just because you refuse to care about anyone. It just makes you lonely on top of hurt. At least if you care, if you connect, if you let yourself be part of something, at least then the time you have means something. I lost everything once, Cole said, and his voice cracked on the words. My wife, my little girl, they died and I couldn't save them and I couldn't survive that pain again, Mara. I can barely survive it now. Mara stepped closer, reaching out with her good hand to touch his arm. I know something about loss too, she said. I lost John, lost the life we were building together. And yes, it hurt. It still hurts. But Lucy is here and she's alive, and every day with her is a gift I wouldn't trade for all the safety in the world. You can't protect yourself from loss by refusing to love, Cole. All you can do is miss out on the living while you're trying to avoid the dying. Cole looked down at her hand on his arm, at the strength in her eyes despite everything she'd been through, at the cabin behind her, where a little girl was probably crying herself to sleep because she'd dared to hope he might stay. I don't know how, he said finally. I've been running so long I don't know how to stop. You stop by choosing to, Mara said simply. By deciding that maybe, just maybe, this place and these people are worth the risk of staying. By giving yourself permission to care again, even knowing it might hurt. What if I'm not enough? The question came out barely above a whisper. What if I stay and I let you down, let Lucy down? What if I can't be what you need? Then we figure it out together, Mara said. That's what community means. That's what family means. Nobody's asking you to be perfect, Cole. We're just asking you to be here, to try, to give us a chance. Cole closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Every instinct he'd honed over a decade of drifting screamed at him to run, to protect himself, to not risk the pain of loss again. But underneath those instincts was something else, something that had been growing quietly over the past 5 days, a longing for connection, for purpose, for home. When he opened his eyes, Mara was still watching him with patient understanding, waiting for him to find his own way through the maze of his fears. The Hendersons offered me work, he said slowly, rebuilding their place, said it would be steady, if not much pay at first. That's good, Mara said carefully, not quite letting hope into her voice yet. That would keep you in the area. If I stayed, Cole continued, the words coming easier now that he'd started. If I took that work and stayed nearby, I couldn't make any promises about the future. Couldn't guarantee I wouldn't wake up one day and feel that old pull to run. But I could promise to try. To give this a real chance, to see if maybe, after all these years, I could learn to stay still. The hope that bloomed on Mara's face was almost painful to witness. That's all anyone could ask, she said. That's more than enough. I should tell Lucy, Cole said, suddenly needing to see her face, to let her know that maybe, just maybe, good things didn't always have to leave. He found her curled up on her pallet, her face still tear-stained, trying to pretend she was asleep. But when he knelt down beside her, her eyes opened immediately, red and puffy and full of hurt. Lucy, I need to tell you something, Cole said gently. If you're going to say goodbye, I don't want to hear it, Lucy said, her voice muffled against her pillow. That's not what I was going to say. Cole reached out and smoothed back her tangled hair. I was going to say that I talked to Martha Henderson today. She offered me work helping rebuild their place. It would mean staying in the area, being around regular like. I'd have my own place to stay there, but I'd be close enough to check on you and your mama, help out when needed. Lucy sat up slowly, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You're staying? Really staying? I'm going to try, Cole said honestly. I can't promise it'll be forever. Can't promise I won't mess it up somehow. But I can promise I'll give it a real shot. Because these past 5 days, being here with you and your mama, it made me remember what I've been missing, made me think maybe I've been running from the wrong things. Lucy threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck so tight he could barely breathe. You won't regret it, she said fiercely. I'll be so good, and I'll help you with anything you need, and you'll see it'll be perfect. You'll want to stay forever. Hey, easy there, Cole said, but he was smiling despite himself, feeling something in his chest loosen that had been locked tight for years. One day at a time, all right? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Lucy was already planning, her tears forgotten in her excitement, talking rapidly about all the things they could do now that he was staying, how he could teach her to ride better, how maybe they could fix up the barn enough to get a cow. How? Mara appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching them with an expression that was equal parts relief and something deeper, something that made Cole's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Tomorrow, Cole said, interrupting Lucy's plans gently, I'll ride over to the Henderson place and take them up on their offer. Get myself settled. But I'll be back to check on you both. Make sure you're managing all right. We'll be fine, Mara said. Better than fine now. That night they ate the last of Martha's cold chicken and fresh bread, and for the first time since Cole had arrived, the meal felt like a celebration rather than just survival. Lucy chattered nonstop about the future, about all the possibilities that had opened up, and even Mara seemed lighter, the worry lines around her eyes softening. Later, after Lucy had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from emotion and excitement, Cole stepped outside for some air. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. He heard the door open behind him and wasn't surprised when Mara joined him, moving carefully but steadily on her own. She'll talk your ear off now, Mara said with a soft laugh. You've given her something to hope for. That's a powerful gift. Or a mistake waiting to happen, Cole said, but there was no real conviction in his words. Maybe, Mara agreed, but I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. It takes courage to try again after losing everything. It takes strength to choose hope over safety. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out over the homestead that had been transformed over the past 5 days from a place barely holding on to something that might actually survive. Thank you, Mara said finally, for everything. For riding through the night, for keeping your promise to Lucy, for pushing the town to remember we existed, for deciding to stay, even though it scares you, for giving us a chance. Don't thank me yet, Cole said. I might still mess this up spectacularly. Then we'll figure it out together, Mara said, echoing her earlier words. That's what people do when they care about each other. They mess up and figure it out and keep trying. And Cole, she paused, making sure he was looking at her. We do care about you, both of us, in case that wasn't clear. Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion he didn't quite know how to process. It's been a long time since anyone did, he admitted. Then it's past time someone reminded you that you're worth caring about, Mara said firmly. She reached out and squeezed his hand, just once, then turned and went back inside, leaving Cole alone with the stars and the night wind and the remarkable realization that maybe, after all these years of running, he'd finally found a place worth stopping for. He stayed outside a while longer, letting the night settle around him, feeling the weight of his decision both frightening and right in equal measure. Tomorrow he'd ride to the Henderson place and start his new job. He'd begin the process of learning to stay still after a decade of constant motion. He'd figure out how to be part of a community again, how to let people matter to him, how to risk caring despite knowing what loss felt like. It wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the old urge to run would rise up strong and demanding. There would be moments when the fear of loss would threaten to overwhelm him. But there would also be Lucy's laughter and Mara's quiet strength and the satisfaction of building something instead of just drifting through. Inside the cabin, both Quinns slept peacefully, finally able to rest easy knowing help was near, knowing someone had chosen to stay. Outside, Cole Tanner stood watch one more night, not as a temporary guardian, but as someone who'd decided to become part of their story, to write new chapters instead of just passing through other people's lives. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles and choices. The prairie wind whispered across the grass. And somewhere in his chest, in a place that had been frozen for years, Cole felt the first tentative warmth of hope beginning to thaw. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face, new reasons to doubt his decision. But tonight, standing in the darkness outside a cabin he'd helped save, Cole allowed himself to believe that maybe Mara was right. Maybe the pain of loss didn't have to define him. Maybe there was another way to honor the family he'd lost, by giving himself permission to care about the living again. It was a start. Just a start. But sometimes, Cole thought, as he finally headed inside to sleep, a start was enough. The dawn that broke on Cole's 6th day at the Quinn homestead arrived with a clarity that seemed almost symbolic. The sky so blue it hurt to look at directly, the air crisp with the promise of a day that would change everything. Cole woke before first light, as he always did, but this morning the restlessness that usually drove him to move on was replaced by something else. A nervous anticipation that felt equal parts terrifying and right. Lucy was already awake when he emerged from his makeshift bedroll by the fire, standing at the window watching the sunrise paint the prairie in shades of pink and gold. She turned when she heard him move, and the smile that lit her face was so full of joy and relief that Cole felt his chest tighten. "You're still here," she said, as if she'd half expected him to vanish in the night like a dream. "Told you I would be," Cole said, moving to stoke the fire back to life. "Going to head over to the Henderson place this morning, get things sorted out. But I'll be back to check on you and your mama before the week's out. Promise?" "Promise," Cole said, and meant it in a way that still surprised him. They worked together to prepare breakfast, falling into the easy rhythm they'd developed over the past days. Mara woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee from the supplies Martha had brought, and emerged from bed looking more like herself than Cole had yet seen. The fever flush was completely gone, replaced by healthy color. Her injured wrist was still wrapped, but she moved with more confidence, more strength. "You look like you're feeling better," Cole observed as she settled at the table. "I feel almost human again," Mara admitted. "Still weak, and this wrist is going to be a nuisance for a while yet, but I'm on the mend, thanks to you." "Thanks to Doc Mayfield and modern medicine," Cole corrected, but Mara shook her head. "Thanks to you for riding through the night to get him. Don't discount what you did, Cole. We wouldn't be here without you." The conversation was interrupted by a sound outside, horses approaching at a steady pace. Cole moved to the window instinctively, his hand going to where his gun would have been if he'd been wearing it, old habits dying hard. But what he saw made him relax. It was Frank Henderson and his brother Robert, leading a spare horse loaded with supplies. "Morning," Frank called as Cole stepped outside. "Figured you might need help moving your gear over to our place. Brought an extra mount so Duchess doesn't have to carry double." "I don't have much gear," Cole said. Which was true. Everything he owned in the world fit in his saddlebags with room to spare. But he appreciated the gesture, the assumption that he was worth making an effort for. Lucy came barreling out of the cabin, still clutching a piece of cornbread from breakfast. "You're taking Cole away already?" she demanded of the Henderson brothers, her lower lip trembling despite her best efforts to be brave. "Just borrowing him," Robert said kindly. "He'll be back before you know it, and you and your mama can come visit any time you want. We're practically neighbors now." 2 miles might as well be 100 when you're little and can't ride alone," Lucy said, but she was already looking at Cole with pleading eyes. "Can I come visit? Can I learn to ride better so I can come see you?" "We'll figure something out," Cole promised, crouching down to her level. "Maybe once your mama's fully recovered, we can work on your riding, but right now I need you to stay here and take care of her. Make sure she doesn't try to do too much too fast. Can you do that for me?" Lucy nodded seriously, accepting the responsibility like the solemn vow it was. "I'll take good care of her, and you'll come back soon?" "Soon as I can," Cole said. He pulled her into a quick hug, surprised at how natural the gesture had become, how right it felt to have this child trust him so completely. Mara appeared in the doorway, and Cole straightened, suddenly aware that leaving was harder than he'd anticipated. These past days had changed something fundamental in him, had cracked open walls he'd spent years building, and now the thought of even a few days' separation from this little family felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "We'll be fine," Mara said, reading his hesitation with the uncanny accuracy she'd developed. "You go get yourself settled. We'll still be here when you come back." There was weight to those words, an acknowledgement of all his fears about impermanence and loss. Cole nodded, not quite trusting his voice, and moved to gather his few belongings from the cabin. His saddlebags, his bedroll, a spare shirt Lucy had washed for him without being asked. It all fit easily on Duchess's back, a stark reminder of how little he'd accumulated in a decade of drifting. As he led Duchess out of the yard, Lucy ran alongside him, reaching up to press something into his hand. It was a small, braided cord, woven from 3 different colored threads: faded blue, sun-bleached yellow, and deep brown. The work was careful but inexpert, clearly made by a child's hands. "I made it last night," Lucy said shyly. "After you said you were staying, it's so you don't forget about us. The blue is for the sky over our house. The yellow is for the sun that comes up every morning, and the brown is for the earth. So you remember where home is." Cole stared at the simple bracelet, feeling emotion clog his throat. Home. When was the last time he'd thought of anywhere as home? When was the last time he'd had something worth remembering, worth carrying with him? "I won't forget," he managed to say, tying the cord around his wrist with fingers that weren't quite steady. "Thank you, Lucy." She beamed at him, then darted back to stand beside her mother in the doorway. Cole swung up into the saddle, adjusting his weight out of long habit, and looked back at the cabin one more time. It stood solid now, patched and reinforced, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin line against the blue sky. It looked like a home instead of a place barely hanging on, and Cole felt a surge of pride at what they'd all accomplished together. "Ready?" Frank asked, and Cole nodded. The ride to the Henderson place took about 40 minutes at an easy pace, following a trail that wound through gently rolling prairie dotted with sage and the occasional scraggly tree. Frank and Robert kept up a steady stream of conversation, filling Cole in on their plans for rebuilding the property, what they hoped to accomplish in the coming months, what role they saw him playing in all of it. "We're thinking a month to get the main house livable," Frank explained. "Then we start on the outbuildings: barn, stable, chicken coop. Martha's determined to have a proper vegetable garden going by late summer. Woman's got ambitions." "Nothing wrong with ambitions," Cole said. "Better than just scraping by." "That's what we figured," Robert agreed. "We tried the scraping by method, and it nearly broke us. Time to do things right, build something that'll last. And having someone with your skills, well, it makes a difference. Makes the whole thing feel possible instead of just hopeful." They crested a rise, and the Henderson property spread out before them. Cole could see immediately why they'd been drawn back to it despite their failed attempt to leave. The land was good. A natural spring fed a small creek that ran year-round, and the soil looked rich enough to support crops if worked properly. The buildings, though, were in rough shape, having been abandoned for months and showing the effects of neglect and weather. The main house was a 2-story structure that had probably been impressive once but now sagged at odd angles, several windows broken, the porch listing dangerously to one side. The barn was partially collapsed, and the fencing around the property had given up entirely in several places. It was a daunting amount of work, but Cole found himself already mentally cataloging what needed to be done, in what order, with what materials. Martha emerged from the house as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her came a younger woman Cole hadn't met, Martha's sister-in-law, he learned, who'd come from Redstone to help with the settling in. "Welcome," Martha said warmly. "We've got a room ready for you upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and dry. Figure you can take your meals with us until you're established enough to prefer otherwise. Pay will be $2 a day plus room and board, and we'll settle up weekly. That work for you?" $2 a day was more than fair for this kind of work, more than Cole had made in months of odd jobs in various towns. "That works fine," he said, dismounting. "When do you want me to start?" "How about after you've had some coffee and met the rest of the family?" Martha said with a smile. "We're not slave drivers here, Cole. You're part of the household now, not just hired help. Might as well get comfortable. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions, tours of the property, discussions about priorities and timelines. There were more Hendersons than Cole had realized. Martha's husband, James, their two boys who were teenagers and big enough to be useful with heavy work, Robert's wife, who was expecting their first child, Frank's wife, who'd died 2 years back but whose parents had come along to help with the rebuilding. It was a whole clan, a network of family and commitment that was so foreign to Cole's experience he barely knew how to process it. But they welcomed him without reservation, treated him like he belonged from the first moment, and by the time evening fell and they all gathered for dinner around a massive table that had somehow survived the abandonment intact, Cole felt something shifting inside him, old defenses crumbling a little more with each shared story and laugh. "To new beginnings," James said, raising his glass of cider, "and to the people who make them possible." They all drank to that, and Cole found himself thinking about the Quinn cabin 2 miles away, about a little girl probably already asleep with dreams of writing lessons, about a woman recovering her strength and her hope. He touched the braided cord on his wrist and felt something settle in his chest, something that might have been peace if he let himself believe in such things. The work began in earnest the next morning. Cole rose with the sun and spent the day helping Frank and James assess the structural damage to the main house, making lists of materials needed, planning the order of repairs. It was hard, physical work, but it was also satisfying in a way Cole had almost forgotten work could be. By the end of the first day, they'd shored up the worst of the porch and replaced 2 broken windows. By the end of the second day, they'd begun work on the roof. The rhythm of the work, the camaraderie of building something with others, the satisfaction of seeing visible progress, it all fed something in Cole that had been starving for longer than he'd realized. And every night, when he climbed the stairs to his small room under the eaves, he'd sit by the window and look out toward where he knew the Quinn place lay. Too far to see, but close enough to feel, and he'd touch the cord on his wrist and think about home. 3 days after arriving at the Henderson place, Cole kept his promise and rode back to check on the Quinns. He arrived mid-morning to find Lucy in the yard feeding the chickens, and the child's face when she spotted him approaching was worth every mile he'd ever traveled to see. "Cole! You came back!" She dropped the feed bucket and ran to him as he dismounted, throwing herself at him with such force he nearly staggered. "I knew you would. I told Mama you would, but she said not to get my hopes up in case you were too busy. But I knew you'd come." "Easy there," Cole said, laughing despite himself, swinging her around once before setting her down. "Of course I came back. Made a promise, didn't I?" Mara appeared in the doorway, and Cole felt his breath catch slightly at the sight of her. She'd fully recovered. He could see that immediately. Color in her cheeks, strength in her bearing, the injured wrist rewrapped, but clearly healing well. But it was more than physical recovery. There was a lightness about her, a hope that had been missing before. "Cole," she said, and there was warmth in her voice that made something flutter in his chest. "It's good to see you. How are things at the Henderson place?" "Good," Cole said, suddenly feeling awkward in a way he hadn't with Martha's family. "A lot of work, but good work, making progress." "Come inside," Mara invited. "I just made fresh coffee, and Lucy's been driving me crazy asking when you'd visit. She's been practicing her riding on that old fence rail like it's a horse." Inside, the cabin felt different, lived in and cared for in a way it hadn't before. Someone, probably Martha or one of the other women from town, had brought curtains for the windows. The shelves were organized and well stocked. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, and the whole place had an air of comfort rather than desperation. They sat together at the table, coffee steaming between them, and Lucy peppered Cole with questions about the Henderson place, about what he was building, about when she could come visit, about whether he'd thought any more about teaching her to ride properly. "Actually," Cole said, glancing at Mara for permission, "I was thinking if your mama agrees, maybe I could take you over to the Henderson place this afternoon. Let you see where I'm staying, meet the family, and Martha's got a couple of horses that are gentle enough for a beginner to practice on." Lucy's eyes went wide with excitement, but she immediately looked at her mother, clearly having learned not to assume permission. Mara smiled at her daughter's restraint. "I think that would be wonderful," she said, "as long as you promise to listen to Cole and not take any foolish risks." I promise, I promise!" Lucy was already bouncing with excitement. "Can we go now? Right now?" Let the man finish his coffee, Mara said with gentle amusement. Then to Cole, you don't have to do this, you're already doing so much. I want to, Cole said, and realized it was true. Teaching Lucy to ride, showing her the Henderson place, including her in this new chapter of his life, it felt right in a way he couldn't quite explain. Besides, she made me this. He held up his wrist, showing the braided cord. Seems only fair I follow through on my end. Mara's expression softened into something Cole couldn't quite read, but that made his pulse quicken. She was so proud of that, she said quietly. Worked on it for hours, wanted it to be perfect for you. It is perfect, Cole said, and he meant it. An hour later, Cole was riding back toward the Henderson place, with Lucy perched in front of him on Duchess, chattering nonstop about everything and nothing, her excitement palpable. Mara had insisted on walking them out, and as they'd ridden away, Cole had looked back to see her standing in the yard watching them go, one hand raised in farewell, and something about the image had struck him with unexpected force. This was what family looked like, what connection looked like, what he'd been running from for so long. Martha welcomed Lucy like she'd been expecting her all along, sweeping the child into her busy household without missing a beat. Within minutes, Lucy was helping Martha's sister-in-law prepare vegetables for dinner, chattering away like she'd known these people her whole life. Cole watched her integrate so easily into the bustle and felt something like pride mixed with a deeper emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. After lunch, Cole kept his promise about the riding lesson. Martha had a mare named Gentle that lived up to her name, patient and steady, perfect for a nervous beginner. Cole led Lucy through the basics: how to approach a horse, how to read its body language, how to mount and find her balance in the saddle. Lucy was a natural, fearless but not reckless, listening to instructions with intense concentration. When Cole finally let her take the reins herself and walk Gentle around the paddock, the joy on her face was transcendent. She sat straighter, her whole being lit from within with pride and accomplishment. I'm doing it. Cole, look, I'm really doing it. You're doing great, Cole called back, unable to keep the smile off his face. Keep your heels down, remember? There you go. Frank wandered over to lean against the fence beside Cole, watching the lesson with an approving expression. She's a good kid, he observed. You're good with her. She makes it easy, Cole said. You think about what comes next? Frank asked. Long term, I mean. You planning to stick around the area? Because if you are, we'd be happy to have you stay on after the main work is done. Always need good help on a property this size. Cole watched Lucy make another circuit of the paddock, her face glowing with happiness, and thought about the question. A month ago, if someone had asked him about long-term plans, he would have laughed. Drifters didn't make long-term plans. But standing here now, watching a child learn to ride, working a job that felt meaningful, living close enough to the Quinn place to be part of their lives, it didn't feel temporary anymore. Yeah, he said slowly. I think I might stick around. If the offer stands. Offer stands, Frank confirmed. Welcome to the family, Cole. The weeks that followed established a pattern that began to feel like routine, like life instead of just survival. Cole worked 6 days a week at the Henderson place, tackling the seemingly endless list of repairs and improvements. The main house slowly transformed from a wreck into something approaching habitable. The barn was rebuilt, stronger than before. Fences were mended, a chicken coop constructed, a vegetable garden laid out and planted under Martha's exacting supervision. And once a week, sometimes twice, Cole would ride over to the Quinn place to check on Mara and Lucy. Sometimes he brought supplies from town. Sometimes he helped with tasks that were still too much for Mara's healing wrist. Sometimes he just sat at their table drinking coffee and listening to Lucy's elaborate stories about the chickens and the garden and everything she'd learned. These visits became the highlight of Cole's week, something he looked forward to with an anticipation that surprised him. Mara recovered fully, her strength returning, but she never seemed to mind when Cole showed up to help with something. They'd fallen into an easy friendship built on shared experience and mutual respect, and Cole found himself increasingly reluctant to leave when the visits ended. Lucy, for her part, had become his shadow on the days she could visit the Henderson place. She'd learned to ride well enough that Mara allowed her to make the journey alone on Gentle, whom Martha had essentially given to the child with the casual generosity that characterized the whole family. Lucy would show up in the late afternoons, help with whatever work was happening, eat dinner with the Henderson clan, then ride home before dark fell. One evening in early summer, about 6 weeks after Cole had first arrived at the Quinn place as a stranger following a desperate child, he found himself sitting on the repaired porch of the Henderson house watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. The work was largely done now, the property transformed into something solid and promising, and Cole had accepted the standing offer to stay on as permanent help. Frank joined him on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and they sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Frank spoke, his voice casual but carrying weight. "Martha and I were talking about the future, about the property. We're thinking of building another cabin on the far corner of the land near the creek. Good spot for it, and it would be nice to have another family settled nearby, sharing the work and the community." Cole glanced at him, uncertain where this was going. "Thing is," Frank continued, "we were thinking that cabin might suit you, if you were of a mind to make this permanent-like. Put down real roots instead of just working day to day. Maybe start thinking about what comes after the work is done, if you know what I mean." Cole did know what he meant. He'd been thinking about it himself more and more lately, about futures and possibilities he'd thought closed to him forever. "That's generous," he said, carefully. "But I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of commitment." "Not asking you to decide today," Frank said. "Just planting the seed, so to speak. You've been good for this place, Cole. Good for all of us. And I see the way you look when you head over to check on the Quinns. See the way Mara looks when you leave. Just seems to me like maybe you found something worth building toward, if you let yourself." The words sat heavy between them, acknowledged but not pressed. Eventually, Frank went back inside, leaving Cole alone with his thoughts and the darkening sky. Later that night, unable to sleep, Cole found himself saddling Duchess and riding toward the Quinn place. It was foolish, riding in the dark, but the moon was full enough to light the trail, and Cole knew the way by heart now. He told himself he just wanted to check that everything was all right, that it was a practical visit, but he knew he was lying to himself. He arrived to find lamplight still glowing in the cabin windows. When he knocked softly, Mara answered quickly, surprise and something else crossing her face when she saw him standing there. "Cole? Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her quickly. I was restless. Thought I'd ride over, make sure you two were managing okay." Mara's expression softened into understanding. "Lucy's asleep," she said quietly, stepping out onto the porch and pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "But I'm glad you came. I was hoping to talk to you anyway." They sat together on the porch steps, the night air cool and clear around them, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Mara said, her voice careful, "Frank Henderson came by yesterday. He mentioned they were thinking about building another cabin, suggested it might be for you." "He mentioned it to me, too," Cole admitted. "And what did you say?" Cole was quiet, trying to find words for the tangle of feelings in his chest. "I didn't say much of anything, just that I'd think about it." "And have you? Thought about it?" "Can't seem to stop thinking about it," Cole said honestly. "About staying permanently, about having a real place instead of just drifting, about—" He trailed off, not quite able to finish the sentence. "About what?" Mara pressed gently. Cole looked at her, really looked at her in the moonlight, at the strength in her face and the softness in her eyes, at the way she'd rebuilt her life after loss, just as he was trying to do. "About maybe having a reason to stay," he said finally. "About maybe having people who matter enough to make staying worth it." Mara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Lucy and I have been talking," she said, "about the future, about what comes next for us. This place is stable now, thanks to you and the Hendersons and the whole community, but it's still hard for one woman and a child to manage alone. And Lucy keeps asking when you're going to come live closer, when we're going to be a real family." Cole's heart was hammering in his chest. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that families come in all different shapes," Mara said, "and that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. And that maybe, if a certain cowboy ever decided he was tired of running, there might be a place for him here. With us. If he wanted it." The offer hung in the air between them, terrifying and perfect in equal measure. Cole thought about his first family, about the wife and daughter he'd lost, and how the pain of that loss had driven him into a decade of aimless wandering. He thought about how he'd learned to associate caring with hurting, connection with eventual loss. But he also thought about Lucy's face when she'd learned to ride, about the braided cord on his wrist, about sitting at this table drinking coffee and feeling like he belonged somewhere. He thought about Mara's quiet strength and the way she'd seen through his defenses from the start. He thought about how the pain of loss didn't go away just because you refused to care about anyone. It just made you lonely on top of hurt. "I'm scared," he said finally, the admission feeling like stripping away armor he'd worn for years. "I'm scared of caring this much again. Scared of what it'll do to me if I lose you both." "I know," Mara said, reaching out to take his hand. "I'm scared too. Scared of trusting someone new, scared of letting Lucy get too attached, scared of all of it. But Cole, being scared doesn't mean we can't also be brave. Doesn't mean we can't choose hope over fear." "What if I'm not enough?" Cole asked, the old fear rising up. "What if I can't be what you and Lucy need?" "You already are," Mara said simply. "You saved our lives, Cole. Not just from the fever, but from giving up, from losing hope. You reminded us that good people exist, that community matters, that we're worth fighting for. You've been enough from the moment you decided to follow a crying child home instead of riding away. Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." Cole looked down at their joined hands, at the way her fingers fit between his like they were meant to be there, and felt something in him finally, fully break open. All the walls he'd built, all the distance he'd maintained, all the running he'd done, it all fell away in the face of this moment, this choice, this possibility. "I want to stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to build that cabin and make a life here. I want to be part of your family, if you'll have me. I want to stop running and start living again, even if it scares me half to death." Mara's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "We'll have you," she said. "Of course we'll have you. Lucy's going to be over the moon. She's been planning it for weeks, you know. Where your cabin should go, how often you'll visit, what she'll teach you about the chickens." Cole laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "She has it all figured out, does she?" "Completely," Mara confirmed. Then more seriously, "Cole, I can't promise this will be easy. We've both been hurt, both been through loss. We're going to have hard days and doubts and moments when the old fears come back. But I can promise we'll face them together, that you won't have to carry anything alone anymore." "Together," Cole repeated, testing the word, finding it fit better than he'd expected. "I like the sound of that." They sat there on the porch for a long time, talking about futures and possibilities, making plans in the way that people do when they've decided to build something lasting. They talked about where the cabin should go, close enough to visit easily but far enough for privacy. They talked about how to handle the integration of their lives, how to give Lucy the stability she needed, how to honor the families they'd lost while building something new. Eventually, as the moon climbed higher and the night grew late, Cole stood to leave, reluctant to go but knowing he should let Mara rest. But as he moved toward Duchess, Mara called his name, and when he turned back she was standing close, her face tilted up to his in the moonlight. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being brave enough to stop running, for giving us a chance, for choosing us." "Thank you for seeing past the running to whatever was worth keeping underneath," Cole said. Then, acting on an impulse he didn't fully understand but didn't want to ignore, he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back tomorrow to tell Lucy the news, if that's all right." "That's more than all right," Mara said, and the joy in her voice carried him all the way back to the Henderson place. The next morning, Cole arrived at the Quinn cabin early to find Lucy already outside, as if she'd been waiting for him. He dismounted and crouched down to her level, suddenly nervous about this conversation in a way he hadn't been nervous about anything in years. "Lucy, I need to talk to you about something important," he said. Her face got very serious, but there was hope dancing in her eyes. "Okay. You know how the Hendersons are planning to build another cabin on their land?" "Uh-huh." "Well, they offered it to me, a permanent place to stay, not just temporary work. And I was thinking, if it's okay with you, I might take them up on it, put down roots here, become a real part of the community. Lucy was vibrating with barely contained excitement. "You're staying? Really, really staying?" "Really, really staying," Cole confirmed. "Which means I'll be around a lot more. To help with things, to check on you and your mama, to teach you riding and whatever else you want to learn. We'd be neighbors, practically family." "Not practically," Lucy said firmly. "Actually, family, right?" Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Yeah," he said. "Actually family." Lucy threw herself at him with such force they both tumbled backward onto the ground, the child laughing and crying at the same time. "I knew you'd stay," she said fiercely. "I knew you were meant to be ours. I knew it from the very first day when I grabbed your hand and you didn't pull away." Cole held her tight, this remarkable child who'd saved him as surely as he'd saved her, and felt tears he didn't bother to hide running down his face. Over Lucy's shoulder, he saw Mara standing in the doorway, her own face wet with tears and bright with happiness, and he knew with absolute certainty that this was right, that this was home, that this was where he was meant to be. The summer that followed was unlike any Cole had experienced in longer than he could remember. Work began on the new cabin, and the whole community turned out to help, just as they had for the Quinn repairs. Cole found himself surrounded by people who'd become friends, building something that would last, creating a future instead of just surviving day to day. Lucy was there almost every day, helping where she could, chattering endlessly about how she'd help decorate the cabin, what she'd teach Cole next about the chickens, what adventures they'd have once he was properly settled. Mara came often too, bringing food, offering advice, staying to watch the progress with a contentment in her face that made Cole's chest feel tight in the best possible way. The cabin took shape piece by piece, situated on a rise overlooking the creek, with a view of both the Henderson main house and, if you looked carefully, the smoke from the Quinn Place chimney in the distance. It was simple but solid, built to last, with a porch that caught the evening sun and a hearth that would keep it warm through winter. On the day they raised the roof beam, Frank called for everyone to stop work and gather round. "It's tradition," he explained, "when you build a new home to mark the moment it becomes complete. So I think we should take a moment to appreciate what we've built here. Not just this cabin, but this community, this family." Martha stepped forward with a bottle she'd been saving, pouring small measures into cups she'd brought for the purpose. "To Cole," she said, raising her cup, "who came to us a stranger and became family, who reminded us all what it means to care for each other." "To Cole," everyone echoed, and Cole felt emotion threaten to overwhelm him at the acceptance, the belonging, the sense of finally having found his place in the world. But it was Lucy who had the final word. She pushed through the crowd of adults to stand beside Cole, looking up at him with absolute trust and love. "You followed me home when I was scared," she said, her child's voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "And you stayed when you could have left. And now you're going to be here forever and ever, and we're going to be the best family there ever was." She tied another braided cord around his wrist, this one made with 4 strands instead of 3, blue for sky, yellow for sun, brown for earth, and now a new color, red, which she said was for family, for blood that bound people together, whether they were born to it or chose it. Cole knelt down and pulled her into a hug, not caring who saw his tears, not caring about anything except this moment, this child, this life he'd almost missed by running. "The very best family," he agreed, his voice thick. "I promise." The cabin was finished in time for fall, and Cole moved in with a sense of homecoming he'd thought he'd never feel again. His few possessions looked almost silly in the space, but Lucy assured him they'd fill it up together, that it would become home in no time. And she was right. Within weeks, the cabin filled with life. Books borrowed from the Hendersons, furniture built with his own hands, curtains Mara sewed, drawings Lucy made that covered one whole wall. It became the place where the community gathered sometimes, where Lucy came to practice reading, where Mara would stop by with fresh bread or to ask his opinion on repairs to her own place. As winter approached, with the cabin warm and solid around him, Cole found himself thinking about the day a little girl had burst from the brush in tears and begged him to follow her home. He thought about how easily he could have ridden away, could have kept running, could have missed all of this because he was too scared to stop and care. One evening, with snow starting to fall outside and a fire crackling on his hearth, there was a knock at the door. Cole opened it to find Mara and Lucy standing there, bundled against the cold, carrying a basket between them. "We brought dinner," Lucy announced, already pushing past him into the warmth. "Mama made her special stew, and I made biscuits all by myself, and we thought we should eat together because that's what families do." "That's what families do," Cole agreed, taking the basket from Mara, his hand lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. They ate together at the table Cole had built, the three of them fitting around it perfectly, and afterward they sat by the fire while Lucy read from her primer, showing off how much her reading had improved. Mara sat beside Cole on the bench he'd made, their shoulders touching, comfortable in a way that spoke of growing trust and deepening connection. Eventually, Lucy fell asleep curled up on the rug by the fire, and Cole carried her to his bed, tucking her in with gentle hands. When he returned to the main room, Mara was standing by the window watching the snow fall. "She's going to want to stay the night," Mara said. "The snow's getting heavier." "You both should stay," Cole said. "It's not safe to travel in this. I can sleep out here by the fire." Mara turned to look at him, and in her eyes Cole saw the same question he'd been asking himself for weeks now. They'd been building toward something, this family they'd chosen, but they'd been moving slowly, carefully, both still carrying scars from past losses. "Or," Mara said carefully, "we could talk about making this more permanent, about not just being neighbors and friends, but actually being the family Lucy keeps insisting we already are." Cole's heart was racing, but it was excitement now instead of fear. "You mean, maybe it's time we stop dancing around what we both want," Mara said. "Time we admitted that what we've been building isn't just friendship, isn't just community. It's love, Cole. Maybe different from what we've had before, maybe built on different foundations, but love all the same." Cole crossed the room to stand before her, reaching up to cup her face gently in his calloused hands. "I love you," he said, the words feeling right, feeling true. "I love Lucy. I love this life we're building. I was so scared to stop running, but I'm more scared now of ever losing this." "Then don't lose it," Mara said simply. "Choose to stay, choose to fight for it. Choose us every day. That's all any of us can do. Keep choosing love even when it's scary." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and felt the last of his walls finally, completely fall away. This was home. These were his people. This was the life he'd almost missed, the family he'd almost lost by being too afraid to stop and care. In the bed across the room, Lucy stirred and smiled in her sleep, dreaming of cowboys who kept their promises and families that stayed together. Outside, the snow fell soft and steady, blanketing the world in white. And inside the cabin, two people who'd survived loss and learned to hope again held each other close and talked about futures, about weddings, about the family they'd already become, and the life they'd continue building together. Cole Tanner had drifted for a decade, running from pain and loss, convinced that keeping moving was the only way to survive. But a little girl's tears had stopped him in his tracks, had given him a reason to follow her home. And in following her, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. A purpose, a family, a reason to stay. The cord Lucy had braided for him remained on his wrist, a reminder of where home was, of the promise he'd kept and the ones he'd continue keeping. And every time he looked at it, he remembered the moment a child had grabbed his hand and trusted him completely, had believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. She'd asked him to follow her home, and he had, expecting to help for a few days and move on. But what he'd found had broken his heart open in the best possible way, had shown him that healing was possible, that love could be rebuilt, that running from fear only made you lonely, while standing still and facing it made you strong. The snow continued falling, soft and persistent, covering the plains in white. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm and steady. And Cole Tanner, who'd spent 10 years as a ghost passing through other people's lives, finally understood what it meant to be fully alive, fully present, fully home. He'd followed a little girl home, and in doing so, he'd found his way back to himself.